The Abandoned Motel. Mark and Sophia drove down the narrow, overgrown road that led to the motel, the asphalt cracked and weed-choked. The building loomed ahead, its pale yellow lights flickering weakly, as if struggling to remain alive. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the neon sign, long dimmed, swung slightly in the wind, squealing with each gust. From the moment they approached, an uneasy stillness seemed to hover over the place, neither inviting nor entirely forbidding, but impossible to ignore. The lobby was small and sparse, a dusty reception desk, a rickety chair pushed against the wall, and threadbare curtains that shivered even though the windows were shut. Faded numbers clung to the walls above each door, like ghosts frozen in time, and the floor was marked by stains of unknown origin, dark and unyielding. The air smelled of mildew, old varnish, and something metallic, faint but distinct, that made Sophia wrinkle her nose. "Think we're the first guests this season?" Mark muttered, trying to keep his voice light. Sophia only nodded, her stomach tightening with a subtle, instinctive dread. Something about the place felt off. There were signs of past occupants, abandoned shoes in the corner, a newspaper from last month, a half-empty bottle on the windowsill, but no evidence of anyone actually being here now. No sounds, no footsteps, nothing except the faint hum of the flickering lights. They were handed a single key and guided up the narrow staircase. Each step creaked beneath their weight, echoing through the hollow corridor, and a chill ran down Sophia's spine as she felt the odd sensation of being watched. When Mark slid the key into their room door, he hesitated, noticing that the doors to adjacent rooms were slightly ajar. Through the slits, a dim, pulsating light seeped out, almost as if the rooms themselves were breathing, responding to their presence. Sophia froze. A shadow moved across the corridor, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it mirrored their own motions with uncanny precision, as though the motel were studying them. Her hand tightened on Mark's arm, and in the silence, they could hear it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from the hallway beyond, echoing against the walls. It was slow at first, deliberate, then gradually quickening, as if the building itself was counting their breaths. And then the light in the corridor flickered violently, plunging them into momentary darkness, leaving only the whisper of that unseen presence. Mark flicked the light switch in their room, but only a dim, flickering bulb responded, casting more shadows than it dispelled. The air inside smelled stale, yet faintly metallic, like rusted iron mixed with dust. Sophia stepped closer to the window, peering out at the overgrown parking lot. Nothing moved. No cars. No signs of life. Yet the unease clinging to her skin felt alive, as if the motel itself exhaled slowly, waiting. "Maybe it's just old wiring," Mark said, his voice betraying the slightest tremor. He tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow, swallowed by the corridor beyond. The shadow had vanished, or perhaps receded, but the memory of it lingered, curling at the edges of their minds. Sophia's gaze drifted to the neighboring doors. They were slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness within, and with it came an uncanny sensation that eyes, real or imagined, were observing them. Mark unpacked their bags quietly, avoiding sudden movements. Each creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, bouncing along the narrow hallways like a warning. Sophia, restless, began to inspect the room. The furniture was simple, functional but worn, a rickety dresser, a bed with a lumpy mattress, a cracked mirror above the sink. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mirror didn't quite reflect her movements accurately. When she raised her hand, the reflection hesitated for a fraction of a second before following suit, a subtle distortion she could almost ignore, but not entirely. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. A faint, rhythmic tapping began again, echoing from the corridor. Sophia whispered, "Do you hear that?" Mark nodded, tense, and they both realized it came not from the wind but from somewhere inside the motel itself, behind walls, perhaps, or under the floor. Every step, every sound seemed deliberate, timed to their presence. A sudden knocking startled them. Not from the walls, not the floor, directly from the next room. Slow at first, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was inside knew they were listening. Mark approached the door cautiously, hand hovering over the knob. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, softly, almost a whisper, a voice called, "Come in, we've been waiting." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She pulled Mark back. "We shouldn't," her words cut off as the light in their room flickered violently, plunging them into momentary darkness. In that heartbeat of blackness, the subtle movements they hadn't noticed before became obvious, shadows shifting under the doorway, shapes pooling along the edges of the hallway, and a sensation of cold, watching presence crawling along their skin. Mark tried to steady his nerves. "It's just, this place is old, abandoned, maybe it's haunted, but we're safe." Yet as the lights returned, they noticed something impossible. The shadows in the corridor weren't mere darkness. They were echoes of themselves, stretched and distorted, moving independently. One shadow lingered near the ajar door of the room next to theirs, waiting, observing, anticipating. A chill ran through Sophia as the whispering began again, this time closer, more urgent. "Why are you here?" The words were soft, almost intimate, yet dripping with a sense of menace. She felt her hands tremble. Mark glanced at her, realizing she wasn't imagining it. The motel wasn't just empty, it was alive, sentient, and their arrival had awakened its attention. They exchanged a look of silent understanding. Leaving now would be dangerous, yet staying was no less threatening. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door creaked open slowly. Not the next room. Not their own. Something in the heart of the motel was stirring, waiting for them to act first. Mark swallowed hard, gripping Sophia's hand as they crept toward the corridor. Each step was measured, careful, but the motel seemed to anticipate them. Floorboards groaned underfoot, not with the weight of their bodies alone, but as though responding to a presence unseen, a force moving just beneath the surface of the air. The ajar doors along the hallway flickered with shadows, and the light from their single flickering bulb stretched long, thin, and menacing across peeling wallpaper. As they approached the source of the creaking door, a cold draft brushed against their faces. The whispering resumed, fragmented now, overlapping phrases, as if multiple voices had merged. "Stay, stay, forever, don't leave." Sophia's breath came in shallow, quick in bursts, and Mark felt the pressure in his chest tighten. The corridor seemed to stretch, elongating unnaturally, disorienting their steps. One of the shadows detached itself from the far wall, a distorted echo of Mark's own figure, moving independently, gliding silently toward them. Sophia froze, gripping his arm. The shadow stopped, just out of reach, and raised what resembled a hand, but it wasn't hers. The shape flickered, uncertain, like a flame bending in a draft, and then receded momentarily into the dark. "Mark, we need to leave," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head. "No. We need to know what's happening. We can't just run blindly." They continued down the corridor, each step amplifying the tension, each creak and whisper pressing against their nerves. A door at the end of the hallway swung open slowly, though there had been no wind, no movement. Through the narrow gap, they glimpsed a room bathed in a sickly, golden glow. Inside, rows of old beds lined the walls. Sheets, yellowed with age, were folded neatly, but the shadows that pooled in the corners were anything but still. They moved, writhing slightly, like smoke given form, whispering faintly, "You belong here." Sophia's eyes darted to the nearest bed. On it lay an object that should not have been there, a small notebook, open, its pages filled with handwriting in a style neither of them recognized. The words seemed to shift when glanced at, letters melting into one another, forming phrases they could almost read. "They watch, they wait, you cannot leave." She reached out, compelled, but Mark grabbed her hand, pulling her back. Suddenly, a floorboard behind them creaked sharply. They spun around, heartbeats thundering in unison, and saw the shadows from the doors along the corridor had moved closer. Each shadow now resembled a twisted echo of a human form, stretching, elongating, bending in ways impossible for flesh. They advanced slowly, deliberately, with that soft, insidious whispering trailing them like a predator circling its prey. The light flickered violently again, plunging the corridor into darkness for a heartbeat, and in that instant, the whispers crescendoed. "You came, you stayed, you belong," Sophia gasped, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that returned immediately after. Mark tried to steady her, tried to reason, but reason felt fragile here, brittle as old plaster, cracking under the weight of the motel's gaze. They realized, with a sinking horror, that the building was not passive. It was sentient. Every shadow, every flicker, every whisper was a response to their presence. They were being observed, measured, tested. And the deeper they ventured, the more they understood that the motel didn't merely contain the abandoned rooms, it contained them, and perhaps many others, folded into its memory, trapped in some timeless cycle of watching and waiting. The corridor seemed endless. Mark and Sophia's footsteps echoed unnaturally, each creak amplified as if the motel itself mocked their advance. The shadows had multiplied. They slithered along the walls, pooling in corners, twisting into shapes that suggested faces, but when examined closely, those faces dissolved into smoke, vanishing before comprehension could take hold. The whispering intensified, a chorus of unseen voices repeating fragments over and over. "Stay, stay, never leave, we are here." Suddenly, a door ahead swung open violently, slamming against the wall and sending a sharp echo down the hall. The golden light from within spilled out, revealing a room they hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to exist outside the motel's known layout. Inside, dozens of beds were neatly lined, each occupied by a shadowy figure. They were not fully human, nor fully apparition. Limbs shifted in impossible ways, heads tilted at unnatural angles, eyes glowing faintly, observing them with a patience that made Mark's stomach churn. Sophia froze. "Mark, we can't," her words were cut short as one of the shadows detached from the bed, sliding across the floor toward them with a liquid, purposeful motion. The hallway walls seemed to bend inward, elongating as the shadow advanced. Mark grabbed her hand, yanking her back, but the space itself resisted, the floorboard beneath them creaking louder, almost pleading with them to stop. Then came the voice, singular now, commanding, low and guttural. "Why do you resist?" It echoed from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through their bones. The shadows paused, their forms quivering as if listening. One leaned close to Sophia, an impossible angle at its shoulders, its voice brushing against her mind. "You belong here, like all before you." Panic surged. Mark yanked her toward the nearest exit, but the corridor stretched impossibly. Each doorway led to another corridor, each step forward only creating another fork, another choice. The motel was changing, folding around them, reshaping itself in response to their fear. Behind them, whispers turned into hissing, mocking laughter, as if the building itself enjoyed the spectacle of their terror. Sophia stumbled into a room that appeared normal, a brief respite. A single chair sat in the center, illuminated by weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. But even here, the air was thick, as if the motel's presence had seeped into the room's very walls. On the chair, she saw a notebook, similar to the one they had glimpsed earlier. The pages moved of their own accord, flipping rapidly, revealing words that burned themselves into her mind. "Do not leave. You are part of the story. You cannot escape." Mark joined her, and together they realized the motel's true nature. It did not merely trap bodies, it trapped attention, consciousness, memory. Every step they had taken, every sound they had heard, every shadow they had seen, all were calculated, feeding the motel's hunger for awareness. The building was a living archive of the trapped, and it had chosen to focus on them. The whispers now became insistent, threading around their thoughts. Step forward, join us," Sophia tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed instantly. The walls seemed to pulse with intent, closing in. Shapes detached from the shadows, mimicking friends and family, then twisting into grotesque, unnatural forms. One approached Mark, smiling impossibly, eyes hollow, hands outstretched. His instinct screamed to resist, but the pull was magnetic. A sudden crash from the room behind them made them spin. The walls buckled, and from the golden limb came a wave of shadows, crawling forward like liquid. The motel was no longer observing, it was hunting. They ran, hearts hammering, their minds assaulted by whispers, distorted reflections in the cracked mirrors, and shifting shadows that mirrored their own worst fears. Mark stumbled, almost falling into a shadow that writhed like smoke, reaching for him. Sophia grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. Each door, each corridor was a choice, but all paths seemed to bend back into the motel's core, where the golden light awaited like a trap set for them from the beginning. And as they ran, they understood something chilling. The motel remembered them now. Every breath, every fear, every heartbeat had been recorded. Escape was no longer just physical, it was a battle for their minds, their very selves. The corridor opened into a vast, impossibly high atrium. Shadows from all directions surged toward them. The golden light pulsed, almost sentient, beckoning. Mark and Sophia exchanged a glance of sheer terror. They had arrived at the heart of the motel, and now there was no turning back. The atrium stretched endlessly, impossibly high. Shadows poured from every doorway, crawling across the cracked tiles, twisting and stretching like smoke given purpose. The golden light pulsed rhythmically, casting elongated, grotesque reflections on the walls. Mark and Sophia stood frozen, terror rooting them in place as the whispers rose into a deafening chorus. "Join us, stay forever, you belong." Mark grabbed Sophia's hand, pulling her forward, but every step felt heavier than the last, as if the motel itself resisted their movement. Shadows reached, brushing their skin with cold fingers that burned and numbed simultaneously. Shapes coalesced into familiar faces, friends, family, even past strangers, twisted, hollow-eyed, beckoning them into the golden light. Fear clawed at their minds, trying to shatter their resolve. Sophia screamed, but the sound was absorbed into the atrium, as if swallowed by the very walls. Mark yanked her toward a narrow stairwell that seemed to lead upward, away from the heart of the motel. The shadows hesitated, then surged, faster now, intelligent, coordinated, blocking paths, reshaping corridors. The motel's pulse quickened, as though aware of their defiance, testing their endurance, their courage, their sanity. They stumbled onto a landing overlooking a floor below, where rooms stretched endlessly in every direction. Each door opened into darkness, but from within came faint movement, figures pacing, staring, waiting. Sophia glimpsed a bed, identical to the ones they had seen before, but occupied by something horrifying, a distorted figure, fused from the shadows of countless past victims, its face flickering between the living and the dead. Its gaze met hers, and an instinctive dread washed over her. This was what awaited those who faltered. Mark pulled her forward again. Each step now required every ounce of willpower. The golden light ahead seemed to call, seductive yet menacing, promising safety if they surrendered. Sophia stumbled, nearly falling, and for a moment, a shadow coiled around her ankle, tugging. Mark yanked her upright, the rope of fear tightening in both their chests. They reached a door at the far end of the landing, slightly ajar, its light dim, natural this time, not golden. Beyond it, the world seemed quieter, calmer. They burst through the door and into a narrow hallway that suddenly felt solid, real. The whispers faded to faint echoes, and the shadows recoiled into the walls, retreating like smoke before wind. The motel's pulse slowed, but the sensation of being watched lingered. Outside, the sky was overcast, dusk settling into a gray, heavy silence. They emerged into the parking lot, hearts pounding, lungs burning, the building looming behind them, inert but still imposing. Sophia leaned against Mark, trembling. "Is it over?" Mark shook his head, though he didn't want to admit it. "I don't think so. It's waiting. It knows we've seen it. It remembers." As they walked toward their car, the motel's neon sign flickered faintly, casting a pale yellow glow across the cracked asphalt. In one window, a shadow lingered, indistinct but unmistakably watching. The air seemed heavier here, thick with memory, as though the building itself exhaled slowly, patiently. Mark started the engine. Sophia glanced back. The front doors of the motel remained closed, silent, seemingly abandoned, but a low, almost imperceptible whisper followed them to the car. "We'll be waiting." Even as the headlights cut through the overgrown lot and they drove away, the feeling persisted that the motel was alive, a sentient entity recording, cataloging, learning. And somewhere, in its endless corridors, more shadows stirred, waiting for the next visitors who would wander too close, drawn by curiosity, fear, or chance. The road stretched before them, quiet, empty, but in the back of their minds, a single thought refused to fade: the motel did not forget. It never forgot. And one day, they would return, or it would come for them. The night swallowed the building whole, leaving only the faint echo of whispers drifting through the wind, promising that the abandoned motel's story was far from finished.